Hello there. This is In Conservation with. It's the fourth series. It's the final one of the fourth series, and we got a big turnout for that. And the reason being, we have Lev Parikian here, and he is a friend of mine. I've known for well since lockdown, but he's a friend that I've actually never even seen in the flesh.
It's going to be quite a shock when we do meet. You're not going to have a blue background with a dragonfly on the on the perch.
Yeah, and
Uh,
also sometimes you meet people and they're shorter or taller
yeah,
than
absolutely.
expected.
Yeah, yeah. You
You,
look,
are you,
you look, you look smaller on the telly, David. That's what
Yeah,
I'll
I'm,
say.
I'm small and fat. Yeah, yeah. How about you?
I am quite short, actually, 5 foot. Well, I like to say 5'8", but that was 5'7". Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm a little bit I'm a little bit taller than you then. Um, Before we start, I just want to say that tonight is, in fact, the whole series has been sponsored by Leica Sport Optics and CJ Wildlife, the people that make that lovely bird food, as well as the equipment that go with it and nest boxes. So thank you guys. And for those who don't know Lev, and I'm sure there's probably no one here tonight, but maybe in the future watching this on YouTube, you might think, who is Lev? Who is Lev? Well, Lev is a writer, he's a broadcaster and a conductor. In that order?
It depends. It depends what day you catch me. And I've been conductor for the longest. I've been conducting orchestras for 30, 25 years. And so I've been writing for written 6 books in the last 10 years. And broadcasting is an on and off thing that has happened. Sort of, not I wouldn't really call myself a broadcaster. I will do broadcasts if invited to do so. So yeah, I would say today definitely writer first, and then next week when I'm conducting, I'll be a conductor first.
Yeah, I noticed you missed out bird watching.
Well, that bird watching, I mean, that's very, as we all know. I mean, I think that the strapline for my first nature book, Why Do Birds Suddenly Disappear? The original subtitle was going to be A Year of Atrocious Bird Watching, which both Scott Fack, who was the editor, and I loved. But then it got kicked back by the publishers who said, no, that's going to put too many people off. I'm better than I used to be, but I think, as we've discussed before, I've only been doing it seriously for about a third of my life. For the first 12 years of my life, or the first, until I was about 13 or 14, I was mad keen on birds. And then in the last 10 years, it's come back with a vengeance. So for somebody like you, who's been absolutely on it your whole life, all 33 years of it, David, you've got a head start on me. But so I do. It's interesting how I very quickly became always on as a birder. That you'll just notice, just going out of the door, looking out the window, you're always aware of a bird. Try not to do it when you're driving. There was a lovely tweet earlier today by Richard Smith, I think you pronounced it, who's just written a great book about teaching his children about nature, growing up, getting them to be interested in nature as kids. And apparently his daughter today said to him, Dad, you don't have to look at the birds all the time. And as he said, well, it was a sparrowhawk flying over the garden. What was I supposed to do? Not look at it? Yeah. So, yeah, it's always there, isn't it? You're
Well,
always there.
I think that potential book you could have written would have been a good one in terms of the title, because Simon Barnes, had a bad title.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, yes, exactly. And he's done very well with it. Both the How to Be a Bad Bird Watcher and also the Bird Watching with Your Eyes Closed, which is a great one. So I wrote the book, but it was just the subtitle was changed just pre-publication. But that was all about the joys of discovering it, and this one's about in some ways it's about the joys of discovering something new as well, for me anyway.
Fantastic. Well, anyway, you are the author of Into the Tangled Bank, which is was long listed for the Rainwhite Prize. Like Rain Sometimes Fall is another one, and Why Do Birds Suddenly Disappear, as you mentioned earlier. You were born, obviously, yeah.
I was born.
I grew up in Oxfordshire, but now you live in South London. With your family, and who are getting used to your increased enthusiasm for nature. And I've noticed that too over the years I've known you, that your enthusiasm has grown. I'm looking forward to the day when we can go out together and actually enjoy nature. Your prize sighting as a birder is still the golden oriole in the Apujaras in southern Spain, and the black red star in Dungeness
Yeah,
power
I
station.
think
Is
we
that
just
still the case?
well we just haven't changed that. I think I should have added a couple to that, but no, those are the ones that um, briefly those two. The black red star in particular was a bird that I never saw as a child, and it has a sort of mystique to me. It was a bit like the Dartford warbler, which is another one, which was, you grew up thinking, I will never see one of those because it hangs out in rubble-filled London or power stations or these almost kind of desolate places. And they were, in my head, they were incredibly rare, or they're much less rare than I think in my head. Certainly on continental Europe, they're quite a common bird, aren't they? Black red star. So
Yeah.
But so having got that in my head that I'd never see one, and then actually hearing the call, actually hearing the song and recognizing it, that upwards chirp, and then turning around and seeing it, in this sort of it was right on Dungeness Power Station, on the chain link fence. So it's not a glamour spot, but it's great for birds. And just had that surge of excitement. And the golden oriole was just we were walking again with my family, and there were all sorts of wonderful things. But we walked around a corner, and it was a really hot day, and I was just beginning to flag. And really, we were all beginning to flag. I think I was flagging the least. And there it was, a beautiful male golden oriole perched on a dead tree, completely, just right in front of me, as if to say, come on, this will give you a boost for the next 3 miles and this will see you home. So, I think so many first sightings of birds stick in your head, but those were the two that just made me go bing.
Well, they sound like,
yeah.
I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, but they sound like great moments.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the moment, I think, rather than the individual birds.
Exactly.
Those
yeah. You are the instigator of the popular Twitter bird song project, a day-by-day guide designing to help beginners unravel the mysteries of birding. Are you still doing that? Is that still going on?
I repeat it every year on Twitter. So it started in February 2019, and it was triggered by my hearing a song thrush. And knowing that I'd, over the previous 4 years, I got to grips quite well with UK birdsong, but knowing how difficult it was. And it was a time, as you probably know, I spend a lot of time on Twitter, and I'm sure that people here might know me from Twitter. And it was one of those times that have been quite common, where Twitter was in a bad mood, and there were people shouting at each other a lot and doing that thing. And I thought, well, what I want to do is spread a bit of joy and a bit of happiness, and how can I do that? And it just occurred to me that people might like to learn, as I had, more about birdsong and about recognizing them from the sounds they make, because so often that the first encounter you have with the bird is hearing it rather than seeing it, and then you turn around towards the sound and it's scarpered. So if you never get a sight of it, it's just really useful, as you know, to be able to recognize it from the sound. So I put a very speculative tweet out that evening saying, would people be interested in this thing if I did it? Maybe a daily bird song. And it turned out that thousands of people were interested. And then just having gained the new sort of double my followership overnight, I then had to do something about it. So I set to and did a bird a day for however long it took to do all the British birds. And it's now on my website, and I just pretty much trot out the same tweets every year on a daily basis. So I'm on day 57 today, I think. So yeah, it's fun and people seem to enjoy it. And I learned a lot as well. There were quite a lot of birds I would have to dig around and listen to various things just to find the best recording. You go, oh, that's interesting how much they vary within the species, the different songs and calls. So yeah, all good, all fun.
Yeah, that's in conservation with subject all on its own, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Song stuff. But talking about sounds, as a conductor, you're devoted to the rich world of amateur music making, and you work with several London-based orchestras. You have produced 2 CDs with the BBC Concert Orchestra and the City of Oxford Orchestra as well. A popular highlight was conducting the theme tune for the Missing Hancocks for Radio 4, BBC Radio 4, with the BBC Concert Orchestra, which sounds amazing.
Yeah, they are. They're brilliant. I just stood there and they played, and I went, "Oh, okay. Well done, everybody. Should we do it again?" It's brilliant fun.
And you studied music at the Royal Academy of Music and was a percussionist before becoming a conductor. So that's kind of your truncated life, really.
Yeah.
Which fascinating. I mean, all of it could be subjects for different Zoom interviews. It's not really a podcast, this, but it's more of a Zoom interview. But tonight, we're talking about this.
Yes.
Is your book, your latest book. Of course, you've watched this in the future. It's been out for a while, and why haven't you got it? But anyway, Taking Flight. Really fascinating. When I actually, in fact, last time we spoke, I think you were working on this book.
I was, yeah.
And what I'm really interested in is the fact is, or why do things fly? Why?
Yeah, why would you? But much easier to stay on the ground, surely. Less dangerous, less hard work. Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, this book, it occurred to me in a very mundane sort of way. I was looking at the bird feeders, as you do, and the blue tit flew across, got some food, went to the tree, flew down it, and it just sort of struck me, God, it flies. That's ridiculous. As you say, why did they do it? And how did they do it? And what happened then was that I realized how little I knew about the subject. I knew of things about certain birds that would hover and certain ones that would make long migratory journeys or whatever, but about the mechanics of it and the history of it, and what things have flown in the past and how it evolved and all of that. So I just kept on asking myself questions. And if I didn't know something, I'd ask myself, about it, go out and find the answer, and built up this picture of the history of flight. The why they would do it, well, originally I think it's the first incentive might have been getting away from a predator. If you imagine, so insects were the first ones to fly. If you imagine that you're an insect being chased by something and you've run up this stalk of something like that, dragonfly, to the top of the thing, where can you go? The predator is possibly slower than you, but it's making ground fast. And some insects, there's a lot of speculation, of course, because this all happened 300 plus million years ago. But the idea is that maybe they would have a little nub on their thorax, which would act as a solar panel, because of course insects would need to heat up. So if you've got a bigger surface area, then that would help you heat up. Wings obviously didn't just go from not existing to existing in their complex form. So there would have to be these transitional phases over millions and millions of years. But the insects that would have these little nubs coming out of the side of their body would have a very slight aerodynamic advantage, in that if they jumped off this twig, they would glide a little bit. They wouldn't just plummet to the floor, they might glide a little bit. And that might be the thing that made the difference. Those ones that had these little nubs would be more likely to survive a predator attack. And of course, selection would favor that. And so gradually they got bigger, would glide further, and so on. And then from there, the big problem is, how did wing joints actually develop? But it happened. So you then get things like that fantastic dragonfly with incredibly sophisticated wings, which have to, of course, be both light and strong, because if you've got a strong wing, or four of them in the case of an insect, that they might weigh too much. So you have to make them very light. And insects do that by making them out of the same stuff their bodies are made of, the exoskeleton, which is chitin, which is incredibly strong, very flexible, but also very light. So that's how come they can, it's a very fine balance between being able to fly and not being able to fly.
Right. So insects were therefore the first to launch themselves into the sky. Yeah.
They
Um,
were, yeah.
well, firstly, why do they have four wings? There's another question I've always asked myself. And the other question is, what does it look like close up? Because this dragonfly behind me, for example, it looks like a sheet of, I don't know what it is, with a bit of black marking on it and some
Yeah,
veins. And that's
yeah.
it, really.
That's it. So if you take an average insect wing, the answer to the question why therefore I have absolutely no idea. So I'm embracing with this book, all the interviews I'm going to do with this book, I'm going to embrace the I don't know, because there's so much I don't know. But everything I know is actually in the book. But I can answer the thing about what is, if you look at an insect wing very closely under the microscope, you'll see, because it looks flat to us, doesn't it? It looks like a sheet of paper, even thinner. But it's two layers of chitin sandwiched tight together, and with this network of veins leafed through it. And of course, in the case of dragonflies, that veining is really quite complex, doesn't it? It looks like a road network. But in some of the insects with smaller wings, like bees, it will be quite a small. They've got, they don't have to get the blood so far, and they don't have to support such a large surface area. So the veining systems are really quite simple. But those veins, of course, they circulate blood, which keeps the wings alive, as it were, but they also stiffen the structure. So you've got that, again, that fine balance of this this wing, which is in flight, it has to be very flexible so that the air can flow more effectively around it. But as I say, it has to be strong. So if you look up close, it's a fascinating, and the veins are, these ridges and valleys and mountains rather than just this flat thing. But then zoom out again, and it looks impossibly delicate, doesn't it? You look at it and you think, how can that possibly be strong enough to make them go in the air? Quite extraordinary, really. Still amazing.
Yeah, we'll come back to insects in a minute, but in the book you talk about the fact that flight has been kind of reinvented 4 times.
Well, the prevailing view is that flight has evolved in 4 groups of animals. So the insects were the first to do it, and it developed as it caught on. It developed in different ways in different insects, and in the book I've devoted 6 chapters to insects, because there are 6 different aspects of it, if you like, that I've chosen to focus on, and we can come back to that in a minute. And so they had it to themselves for 120, 130 something million years, give or take, and then along came the pterosaurs, which are, of course, what people might know as pterodactyls. Pterodactyl are a kind of pterosaur. The pterosaurs are these reptiles related to the dinosaurs, so they have a common ancestor up there, but not actually dinosaurs. But they were living around the same time, 150 plus or thereabouts million years ago. The first ones came earlier than that. So they were by far the biggest things to get into the air at that time. And as they grew, as they developed through and into the Cretaceous, into the late Cretaceous, several species reached unbelievably large proportions. And by the time we get to the extinction event at the end of the late Cretaceous, you've got pterosaurs there which have wingspans of, they reckon, up to 11 meters.
Wow.
Which is big. Yeah, which is big. So then the analogy I use in the book is that the biggest one is about the size of a giraffe. So while they were doing that, while they were developing flight and being successful with it, the dinosaurs were developing it. And of course, that is manifested in the animals we now know as birds. 11,000 species or thereabouts of living dinosaurs on the planet, and flight served them very well as well. And the 4th group to develop it were the only mammals to fly, and those are bats. It's important, I think, at this point to point out that when we talk about what I decided to focus on, we talk about flight. We're talking about powered flight rather than gliding, because plenty of people, I'm sure, will be going, yeah, but hold on, what about flying squirrels? What about flying snakes? Flying fish, flying lizards, flying frogs? What's interesting I've noticed about this is that all of those things have the word flying in their name, and none of them really fly, whereas none of the things that actually do fly have the word flying in them, except the fly, which fly is named, it was so good they named an insect after it. So on the spectrum of flight, and all of those flying lizards and so on, and those things, they are on the spectrum of flight, and they glide to greater or lesser effect. And for all we know, some of them might be on the evolutionary path that is taking them towards powered flight. So you see, let's call it a flying squirrel, gliding from treetop to treetop in the Borneo rainforest. Who knows that in 1 million, 2 million, 3, 10 million years' time, those won't have joined the ranks of the flyers. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about flight. And in those 4 groups, those are the 4 main groups. It is slightly complicated when you look at the flying dinosaurs, because of some of the things that weren't birds or were kind of bird-like that were hanging around in the Cretaceous. There seem to be loads of them, and it's possible that they evolved their own ways of doing it separately. But those, broadly speaking, those are the 4 groups that have ever flown. And you'll notice that humans aren't on that, even though we probably have to be.
But it kind of begs the question, what's going to happen? We talk about, you spoke about squirrels maybe in 5, 10 million years' time, having their version of flight. What about guys that are flying already? I wonder what that's going to be like.
Well, how good might they be, or how they might develop, how big they might get? I mean, that's the interesting thing with looking at pterosaurs, for example. The first ones, as I understand it, 200 plus million years ago, they were relatively small, and they would have, I think, they developed the first one that was found in Priondactylus, which is in the Prione Valley in northern Italy. And that would have lived in a forested or woodland environment, and it would have come down from the trees. But as they developed and diversified, although they don't seem to have developed and diversified as much as birds, but they did. They grew, and so they seemed, not all of them grew, but they became bigger and bigger pterosaurs. So you had things like, towards the end, there was one called Pteranodon, which was an ocean-going, gliding much like a huge albatross sort of thing, using the same soaring technique across the oceans. And those, so it seems that they hit the limit, the upper limit of size for being able to get off the ground. And birds have been big, but the biggest birds have generally been flightless. We're talking about extinct ones like the elephant birds and things like that, and the moa and things like that. But the largest wingspan bird today is the wandering albatross, which I think is 3-something meters. I've so many figures, they're all kind of jumbling around in my head, but it's something like 3.5 meter wingspan. So you wonder, might they grow bigger, or might they shrink? It all depends on how their habitats evolve over long periods of time, I suppose.
Yeah, and of course, I think back in those days when the pterosaurs were hanging out, there was more oxygen in the atmosphere, wasn't there? It was about 20% more oxygen.
Not quite. Well, when the pterosaurs were hanging out, not necessarily, but certainly when before that, when the things that are called griffin flies, that were like, they weren't actually dragonflies, but they were ancestors of things that then became dragonflies, if you see what I mean. They were, along with other animals around at the time, they were much bigger than the ones we have today, and that was, it's thought, because there was more oxygen in the air. Yeah, they had their time. There were some quite hair-raising statistics about things that were around at that time, which I might not, because people might want to sleep at night. But certainly, yeah, really, really quite big things flying around and scrabbling around.
Well, that's interesting, because if it wasn't for the fact that there was more oxygen in the air, then the pterosaurs getting so big, how could they have flown? Were they quite heavy?
Well, they weren't. Again, this is, of course, there's so much that isn't known, because the fossil record for anything is, we don't see. The way I liken it to, imagine you're watching a film, and the projectionist only allows you to see half a second of the film every 7 or 8 minutes. So it's probably inaccurate, but it's an idea of how little of the fossil record, how little of life the fossil record potentially represents, because of course the conditions for fossilization are quite specific, and there'll be loads of things that have died in the past that didn't get fossilized. So we tend to know, obviously paleontologists would be able to speak much more knowledgeably about this than I can, but they also take that into account. So they will find a juicy place for fossils. You go, okay, so all these things lived here, and it's loads of things that were adapted for water, blah blah blah. And then you go, well, okay, that's only because there was water here. So we know that there will have been other things around that didn't get preserved because they didn't die in a place where they could get preserved. The pterosaurs, yes, from the fossil record, there's been a lot of debate over the years about what size they were and what weight they were. And when you come to those big ones, the biggest, the Quetzalcoatlus, the estimates of its weight have ranged hugely over the years. And again, I've got the numbers written down somewhere, but I can't get them off my head. But that size, that 11-meter wingspan, seems to be authoritative these days. And it would have been right at the edge. And the reason it could get in the air is because of its bones, like birds, similar to birds. It had highly pneumatized bones, so the bones weren't solid but filled with air. So you've got very, very incredibly thin bone walls, and then a structure within the bones that enables this lightness, but also the strength. And extremely effective surfaces, wing surfaces, made up of not like a vat membrane, but shot through with these with muscles, very, very thin muscle fibers. So it incredibly effectively developed for that kind of flight. And of course, those aerofoils that they were using would have enabled that sort of economical soaring flight that they would have practiced. The big problem would have been for pterosaurs getting into the air. And the most recent research, as I understand it, shows that they were that they launched from all fours. So they had, if you think about a bird taking off, they have the two forelimbs, which are their wings, and they've got two legs, which will help, watch a pigeon, it pushes off with the legs and will flap its wings as deeply as possible to get it up in the air and then revert to a more normal stroke. What pterosaurs used, they had reasonably good hind limbs, but they also had very strong forelimbs, which were both wings and launching arms, if you see what I mean. So they would be producing the thrust to get them off the ground with all four limbs, and then co-opting those front thrusters as their wings. So in many ways, that's a more effective use of the things of their limbs than birds, because birds once they've got in the air, their legs aren't doing anything. They're just dangling. I mean, you see all those, plenty of birds that have very dangly legs. They're not contributing to anything. Yeah, that's about the size of it. What was the original question? I've forgotten.
Well, I was just talking about the weight, but let's actually talk about insects again, because we've got things. I mean, you spoke in your book about several groups of insects, flies being one of them, as well as beetles. And the classic question that's always asked by every kid, including myself, is how the hell does a beetle, a big, fat, heavy beetle, or even a bumblebee, get airborne?
It's the old myth, isn't it? It's the old myth that when you were a kid, I'm sure you heard this: bees are too heavy to fly, and it's even repeated in the beginning of the DreamWorks movie? I think it is the Bee movie. And it has this whole thing about bees are too heavy to fly, and yet they do it anyway. And this urban myth, as far as I can tell, started in a book, a 1920s book written by a Frenchman called Antoine Magnan, called Le Vol des Insectes, The Flight of the Insect. And he had sat down with his assistant, and they had worked out that aerodynamically, according to the laws of aerodynamics as they understood them at the time, insects, not just bees, but all insects, were too heavy to fly. What they didn't take into account is the way insect wings work. They were assuming, if I just do a demonstration, that they were subject to the same laws of aerodynamics as an aeroplane. Fixed wing aeroplane goes through, and the airfoil cuts through the air like that, and the air flows like that. And they looked at insects and thought, well, what they're doing is they've got the same thing, but they're just flapping them up and down like that. But of course, what happens if you flap up and down like that is you produce your lift by flapping down, and that might get you up a little bit. And then you immediately go back up like that, and that completely counteracts what you've just produced. So all you're doing, and you can look at this, if you go to YouTube and look at the early experiments of humans with their flying machines, you just see people just flapping up and down. And even if they were able to produce enough lift to get themselves off the ground, it's not going to work. I mean, humans are too heavy for that anyway. So the stroke of an insect's wing, I need to get good at demonstrating this. It's down and forward, so you're producing lift and thrust to counteract the weight and drag, and then it flips it over and goes back. So it's not cutting; it calls pronation. So it flips the wing the other way up to go for the upstroke, and then forwards again, and it's doing this multiple times a second. Something like that dragonfly, I think, is probably between 25 and 50 times a second, which is, that's a lot. The beetles, I'm not quite sure, but in the hundreds. A honeybee will flap something like 200 to 230 times a second. There are tiny midges that they get in America, which are called no-see-ums, which flap their wings 1,000 times a second, which is, again, unimaginable. And again, when you think about the tininess of these things, the muscles, the muscle system that is required to do that is quite extraordinary for our feeble brains to encompass. So let's take a beetle. What beetles did when they evolved. So you had the dragonflies and mayflies were among the first ones, or their ancestors were among the first to develop it, and they had two pairs of wings for reasons which I should have looked up. What beetles did, they figured, well, they didn't do it, but evolution figured they could manage with one pair of wings, the hind wings. And what became more useful for beetles as the millions of years passed was to have something that could protect those wings. So you look at mayflies and dragonflies, when they're not flying, they're just sitting there with the wings either outstretched like that, or they fold them along the body a little bit, but they're not undercover or anything. They're vulnerable. And of course, in flight, they can't go into narrow spaces because their wings are in the way. What beetles did, they developed the front set of wings into things called elytra, which are these protective shells. So if you look at a ladybird, for example, one of the most familiar beetles, they have that shiny red, usually with black spots or yellow or different colors coating, and that is the two what used to be front wings but are now protective shells. And what that enabled them to do was to hide and to burrow down into things and to get into underneath bits of bark to get protection when there was a bad weather or a fire or whatever it was, and to burrow into the leaf litter or to bury themselves under earth. So when things got tricky, there they were nicely protected. And what they do when they fly, those elytra, they spring open and they just hang there. And the most successful ones have them designed, made in such a way that they're not necessarily aerodynamically useful, but they're not enough of a hindrance to stop the back wings being able to do enough to get them up in the air. If you go to YouTube and look up a ladybird slow motion, it's a fascinating process. You see those things spring up like a DeLorean, and then the wings, they gain pretty quickly. And of course, the other, each animal that uses flight in a different way. So for beetles, very often, there's a huge variety of beetles, so it varies, but they wouldn't need the same maneuverability or agility that a dragonfly would. A dragonfly is a hunter, so it needs to be able to outsmart its prey, and they're incredibly successful at that. Beetles don't necessarily need to do that, because the first ones, they would have been eating wood, or they were eating rotten stuff, or they're eating the carnivores might do a bit of hunting, but they would also be eating meat from the food from the ground. So they don't need to be so nimble necessarily, but they might just it might just be easier for them to fly over there to get to the water's edge, or to get to that perch, or to get to where they're going to roost, rather than walk there. So it's quicker. That's why. And there's another reason you'd fly. It's quicker to get to places once you can do it. And it also enables your population to disperse more easily and more widely. So with flight, insects, and by far the majority of flying things on the planet are insects, millions of them. That helped them radiate and to go to new habitats and to colonize the whole Earth, except Antarctica. Well, there are insects there, but this phrase that you come across all the time when you're reading about this stuff, such and such lives on all the continents except Antarctica.
We talk about insects and we think about them as flappy things, as you say, super fast, like flies. But then on the other side of the insect spectrum, as far as I'm concerned, are the languid butterflies. I mean, I've been in South America and seen those bird-man butterflies that just glide. And also, when I went to Costa Rica, I discovered a helicopter damselfly, and that actually seems to fly like a helicopter. Its wings seem to do that rotation thing. I know it's an optical illusion, and it's very slow as well.
Surprisingly, I suppose in Britain we're not as diverse in the butterfly area as those tropical regions, but we've got some good ones. And I think if probably the most spectacular in flight would be the quite rare swallowtail, wouldn't it? Which is large and goes relatively slowly. Funny enough, as I was proofreading, the very, very final thing I changed in the book with the editors was that I'd put that swallowtails flap their wings at a relatively sedate rate of 5 flaps per minute. It should, of course, be 5 flaps per second, and I'm really quite glad I caught that just before we went to print. But that's still, for an insect, that's really very slow. And of course, that is, again, they don't necessarily need to get anywhere in a hurry. They just need to get there with some species. And sometimes they do need to get there in a hurry because flight is a strong incentive for it is predator evasion. And of course, one of the things that instead of predator evasion, you might not want to, you might not be able to get out of the way of a predator, but if you can persuade it that you're not worth eating, or that if they eat you, they will come to some harm, then that can help as well. So a common thing about is this idea that things will be coloured in such a way that makes you think that they're poisonous. Some of them are poisonous, so if you can look like something that is poisonous without being poisonous yourself, you can put a fast one on the predator. So that's a common usage for the coloration of the wings and so on of butterflies and some moths.
Yeah, fascinating. Let's move on to birds.
Go on then.
You've talked about a couple types of bird in your book. I think if I remember rightly, you did talk about geese and the albatross, of course, and pigeon, but
Yep.
And hummingbirds as well. And they are
Of course.
a class of their own, really, as well as the swifts. Can you kind of surmise what birds are about in terms of their flight?
You mean why do they do it?
More how than why.
Well, it depends. There's quite a lot of diversity. So let's take those two extremes, or the ones that fly. I do devote a bit of time to the non-flyers as well, the ones that have lost their ability to fly. But let's take those two extremes: the hummingbirds, all 300 plus species of them, and albatrosses. Both of those kinds of bird are actually almost at the edge of what it means to be a bird. I mean, you take a bee hummingbird, which is the smallest bird in the world, in Cuba, isn't it? And it's, again, I can't remember how big, but it's smaller than a lot of insects. And if you saw one, you could easily think that. Have you ever seen one? You must have done.
You know what? I've never seen. I've seen a Vervian hummingbird,
right?
Which is the second smallest, but I've never seen a bee.
But similar sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, and when you saw it, did you think that's an insect, or were you on the lookout for the hummingbirds and thought there it is? Or was there a moment?
Even if I was on the lookout, it's still like a bird insect to me. So.
Yeah, exactly. And so what they're doing is hummingbirds have a particular kind of anatomy. They've got these ball and socket shoulder joints, which enables them, rather than doing downstroke, upstroke, downstroke, upstroke, with all the lift and thrust coming from the downstroke, they flap their wings in a sort of flattened figure of 8 pattern, which enables them to produce lift on the upstroke, what would normally be called the upstroke as well. So they're doing that, but again, really, really fast. And what they have typically have done is they've co-evolved with flowering plants, and as you can see from the shapes of their beaks, the sicklebill one is the particular one which has evolved, as Darwin was the first to notice. He said, I saw the shape of the bill, and he said there's going to be a flower somewhere that has that shape trumpet, so that those birds and those birds alone can access the nectar. So then but in order to do that, they have to be able to hold very, very still indeed. So this is where the hovering comes in. And you see the same thing in insects such as the hummingbird hawk moth. It's another one that is we're sort of crossing over there with the insects and the smallest birds. so there's all sorts of other things that hummingbirds do to enable this, like they're incredibly their high metabolism, the fact that they have to drink so much nectar in order just to stay alive. And then you go to the other extreme and look at an albatross, which has got so expert at manipulating the specific conditions that pertain above the water surface, that they can, using the technique known as dynamic soaring, they can, you can barely call it flying because they're not flapping their wings. They're using the wind currents, and they have these long, narrow wings, which are particularly effective for soaring, because they, just by being there, they produce lift. And they are able to, just with barely a twitch of these wings, find the air currents and go up to the top of the thing, and then allow themselves to gain speed by diving into the trough of the wave, and then catching the upcurrent, updraft, and going, so just zigzagging back and forwards across the ocean. And they can do this for an extraordinary length of time. And again, they're like the hummingbirds, they are adapted to their particular environment, the open sea. They'll nest on land, won't they? But the payoff for that is that they are a lot of albatross species are spectacularly bad at landing. And again, there's some quite fun YouTube footage of seeing an albatross coming into land and just tumbling over and then getting up as if to say, no, quite normal. Didn't mean to. That was absolutely meant to do that, because if you're going to do that, then if you're going to be good at soaring across the ocean, then you have to have a payoff somewhere, and that's where theirs comes.
Yeah, I mean, birds are just incredible, and we can talk about that all night too. But
Yeah.
we've got to leave some space to talk about the bats. I mean, for the bat people out there, bats are fascinating. They seem to fly with their hands, don't they?
Yeah. So what I found fascinating about the bats, of course, is that they're our closest relatives. They're the closest we have got, or we would ever get, to being a flyer. They are the flying mammals, and their hand structure is exactly the same as ours. They just have longer fingers, and what they have, it's similar to the pterosaurs. But if you think about pterosaur, so pterosaur has the three normalish fingers, and they've got the membrane spread between them, and then their fourth finger is incredibly long. It's the kind of thing that you might get a ping pong ball out from behind a radiator with. It is just, whereas bats, their fingers are more evenly spread through the membrane. And the membrane is, again, it has muscles in it, but it is more, it's a bit more flappy than the pterosaurs would have been. But by using all their fingers to do that, they can manipulate it in ways that birds can't, because birds have this fantastically beautiful fan of feathers that creates one solid-ish aerofoil, and then they can spread them a little bit to help them break and so on. But with bats, it's much more a case of manipulating and maneuvering the membranes to make themselves maneuverable. So yeah, they're fascinating. I think there's also the mystique of bats, which is that they are predominantly nocturnal. So there's always something a little bit mysterious about a nocturnal animal. So they're kind of on the edge of something that we experience. So when our lives overlap, then it's a particularly thrilling experience.
Yeah, I enjoy, I mean, for those who don't know, I'm actually in Spain at the moment, in southwest Spain, next to Madrid. And during the day, especially towards the evening, but certainly during the day, I've seen bats flying around. And of course, if you come from Australia or places like that, you see the fruit bats out, and I've often mistaken them for birds as they fly
Yeah,
towards us. Um, but it's interesting how all these animals have evolved, and it makes me wonder, with my science fiction hat on now, is it possible? You know, you see all these films, and even in folklore and tradition and history and stuff, you got Pegasus, you got well, sort of human, obviously, but then you got humans, angels, with wings.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think to myself, if we had wings, then we would have to have massive chests, in terms of
yeah,
petrol
yeah.
muscles.
Absolutely. To have and the whole structure would have to change to anchor the you look at a pigeon, for example, they've got that quite strong and quite prominent and deep keeled sternum to to attach those muscles to, and quite bulky muscles. So yes, I can't should have done the maths on this as well, which is how big we would have to be. I think somebody did do it, and how big the wings would have to be and how strong they'd have to be. But it's quite a thought. Yes, you can follow the imagination with flying. I think it's that fundamentally it's something that it appears miraculous once you start looking at that. I mean, the motivation for this book really was this idea that it goes on all around us. And we take it for granted, I think, really easily. You look at a bird and you go, oh yeah, it's flying. And you go, actually, we should be going, oh my God, how's it doing that? So that was where it came from. And how it would be. I think we do dream of flying, don't we? And we imagine what it could do for us and what it would feel like to fly. And people will engage in, extreme sports that get you close to like bungee jumping, for example. That's the feeling of throwing yourself on but being safe. So we have an attraction to things that give us that sense of freedom, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. We kind of we get rounded by I was just about to say with Superman, you know.
Yes, Superman.
But why are we fascinated with flying? Why?
Because it's well, I don't know why. We're talking philosophy now, but my guess is that it is an extra, that freedom thing, but it's also an extra dimension to our lives. It would add an extra, because we live really, earthbound, two-dimensional lives. In a way, we're stuck to the ground, and any time we get above it, it's with mechanical help. But to be able to fly, it would give you that a much more, from a very simple basis, it would give you a much more complete view of the world. You'd see it in a different way. So I wonder if that's got something to do with it. It's something. It's wanting to do something that we can't, wanting to be able to do something that we can't, and never, touch wood, never will be able to. But you can see, obviously, it's there have always been humans aspiring to do it from Icarus onwards. So, and we've learned how to do it with the help of machines, and we've also learned to make things that without us can do it. So we can make things that are like dragonflies, but they're not nearly as good at being a dragonfly as a dragonfly is. Even with all our ingenuity and brilliance and problem-solving capabilities, we still don't really know. There's reading about this. You get scientists who've done lifetimes of research, and they're going, actually, we still don't really know what's happening when a fly flies. So I think there's a mystery to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, even if we could fly, I mean, when you look at the animals that can fly, you have to be absolutely in tip-top, super fit condition. And many
Yeah,
of us, look at us, most of us are overweight.
yeah, yeah,
And if we were to engage in flight, just imagine, we didn't have the muscle power. It's like running. you'll be
Yeah,
panting after 10 yards. So
yeah,
maybe it's impossible for most of us anyway.
yeah. I think so.
But, Lev, if you could fly,
Oh,
what would you like to fly over? What would be the thing you'd like to fly over?
yeah. It's interesting. I've seen interviews with Chris Hadfield, the International Space Station astronaut, and he obviously spent however long it was on that thing, which goes around at a height of whatever it is. It goes around the Earth every 90 minutes. And he said the interesting thing is that when it started, when astronauts first go on there, everybody's waiting for the moment when they fly over their home country, and they point, oh, there's London, or there's Toronto, there's whatever. And as time wore on and they got more used to it, each of them individually just developed this ability and inclination to see the whole thing and just to marvel at the whole world, rather than going, this is my little bit, this is mine, this is mine, just as this is all ours. So I think the sort of the soft answer to that is that I would like to see all of it. I'd like to fly over the whole world and see it in that same way. And I think that would be a useful thing for everybody to do as well, because you just, given the state of the planet, I think that would be a generally useful thing for humanity. So that's a soft. Like you really want me to say the Grand Canyon, don't you, or Ayers Rock, or something. But actually, I want to see the whole world, man.
Well, that's great. Good answer. And what is your favorite flying thing?
Okay, right. In this second, it is. I'll tell you what it is. It's an Allen's hummingbird, and I'll tell you why Allen's hummingbird. Because there's a webcam that I've got up that and she's the chicks have hatched, and there's two of them sitting in the little cup nest, and they're just beginning to get to the stage where they're almost too big for it and jostling around with each other. And every so often, the mother comes in, and you hear this. So I'm fascinated with the Allen's hummingbird, but it has to be hummingbirds, really, or albatross, or swifts, or hummingbirds, or dragonfly,
I don't know if you can
or
hear
pterodactyl.
I don't know if you can hear my. I've got some swifts outside my window actually.
Have you?
I don't know if you can hear them. I can hear them from where I am anyway.
Soon they'll be here. A couple of weeks.
Well, not these ones. These are pallid swifts. They'll probably be with us in November.
Well, we've had a load of alpine swifts up here. You've been following that?
Yes. I've never seen an alpine swift in the UK in my life.
No. Well, I was hoping that one might fly over me here on the Isle of Wight today, but no. They have been seen pretty much all over the place, I think. So fingers crossed. Look up.
Absolutely, look up. Well, listen, Lev, great book.
Thank you.
Always enjoy your books anyway. It's your third time on In Conservation With, and it's not going to be your last, I'm sure. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm. Thank you so much for making us think about flight again in a more sort of detailed way, as you've this research you've done is so excellently pointed out, really. So thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
That's great. Well, thanks for asking me. And I think, as I say, what it came from for me was realizing I didn't know enough about it and just ask myself questions and being curious and interested in it. And I think it's really enriched my life. Writing this book has enriched my life because I'm now seeing everything that's flying. I don't think it's necessarily enriched my family's life because I'm pointing out everything that I see. But it's made me see things with new eyes again, which is always good.
Yeah, it's always a way. It's a good way to be in life, I think. Zoomers, again, thank you very much for being here this evening, this morning, this afternoon, and supporting In Conservation With, which is coming back in October. So keep an eye out on social media, but also keep an eye out on my website, theurbanbirderworld.com, to see who's coming up, because there's going to be some wonderful names and subjects coming up for the next season. But if you haven't seen many of the conservations with that have been out so far, check out the website or check out my my YouTube channel, The Urban Birder World. Check that out. They're all there. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone. And until we meet again this summer or winter, if you're living in the Southern Hemisphere, keep looking up.